Welcome to the Unbounded podcast series, where we help you attain new levels of performance and well-being by learning about the human mind.
In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at how we can make certain decisions in an uncertain world.
Nothing is certain. Everything is changing. Look at the world that we live in right now. Look at the economy, look at the political situation, look at the climate situation, but also just look on a day-to-day basis on what's going on in your home or in your street or in nature. Nature is changing moment by moment by moment. If we look at this from a quantum mechanics perspective also, we now know that everything is energy. It's actually everything on the planet in the cosmos is vibrating. So everything is in a constant state of movement and change. And the problem is that business wants certainty, and people like certainty. People want to feel like they're in control. But actually, if everything is constantly in a state of change, then that's actually not possible. So as a leader in this world, there's a really important need to embrace change, to accept it, to be comfortable with it, to let go.
So if we look at the role of the mind in decision making, it's actually a very interesting subject, because often we think that decision making is something that we do. But if you just take a moment now to reflect on how is it that I come to a decision about anything? What's the psychological process that takes place and makes that happen? And in a very simplistic way, if you kind of go into your own experience to look at how that occurs, really all that happens is that thought shows up in your mind. A thought will show up in your mind that will have you take a particular course of action or not. And whether that decision feels certain or uncertain is really just based around the sense of clarity that we feel around the thought that has shown up in our mind. And what happens is that we retrospectively will look back and say, yes, that was the right decision, or no, that was the wrong decision. And again, that level of certainty or uncertainty is also just a thought that has shown up in our mind in a particular moment in time. So the question to ask yourself is there even such a thing as a right or wrong answer? Is there even such a thing as certainty or uncertainty? And when we're feeling certain about something or uncertain about something, is that just pointing to the sense of clarity that we have or don't have in any moment about a particular thought that's popped into our minds? Now, often what can happen is that when we're in the space of not knowing, so we don't know the answer to something, we don't feel like we can make a decision about something, what can often happen is that there becomes this sense of urgency. I need to know the answer. We need to know now. Now, anyone that I guess has been through one of our programs or who understands a bit about the principles behind quality of mind will also see that there's a real power in knowing and respecting that part of our innate design as human beings is that we have fresh thinking and insight available to us in any moment. Now, when we don't quite understand that, and we think that we need to know and we need to know right now, what can often happen is that we'll start over-analysing things. So we will seek out more information and more data to try and, I suppose, get away from the uncomfortable feeling of not being able to make a decision. So an example of this that I can think of is when I was a board director in retail, often what would happen is that where there was a lack of clarity on the board, there would be these requests that would go out to the teams in order to produce more analysis and more data. And on one level, that seemed to make sense at the time, but now I have more of an understanding of the mind and how it works and the role of clarity in that. I can really see how often that was just a crutch. It was just purely a sign that the board and the leadership team were not in their clarity.
So I think what you're saying in there, Renna, is that there is no right answer. Most of the time, there isn't a right answer. There's not a right or a wrong. There's not a getting it right or getting it wrong. We live in this world of uncertainty. And so most of the decisions that we make end up being a choice. And what you're saying is that we need to take on board data and information, but actually we're looking for clarity inside us when something becomes obvious. And the key question for our listeners is, how do they become clear on what they think, on what they want to decide? Now, the funny thing is, they probably knew what they really needed to do. And this, for me, brings up the role of the gut and the heart versus the brain. And some of you may be familiar that actually, if you look at this neurologically, we've got three brains. We've got neurotransmission going from the gut and from the heart to the brain, as well as the other way around. And we tend to over-rely on our brain. We tend to over-rely on the cognitive, intellectual, trying to work it out and trying to justify it or trying to make sense of it. So it's a really useful thing to say, what does your gut say? Because I bet in that retail example, the board actually had a gut about what they know they needed to do. And then they got caught up in the brain trying to justify it or validate it and so on and so on. So it's a real question for you, the listeners. What does your gut say on a decision? And what does your heart say?
And I would invite people to reflect on that, really, because, when have you made a decision about something and you've really had to grind it out and really think about it and analyse it and list the pros and cons or whatever it might be, kind of intellectually, logically get to the answer, versus the times where the answer almost just seems to pop into your head out of the blue, or not even necessarily out of the blue, but the feeling that goes along with that. So that sense of obviousness and, yep, I just know. And that's where we want to be looking towards. That's the direction we want to be looking towards for the answer.
I was working with a chief exec the other day of a manufacturing business that imports a lot of things from Europe right now. And being based here in the UK, we have Brexit just around the corner. And with Brexit comes the potential for a no deal. And so on November the 1st this year, this chief executive could immediately overnight incur 4% increase in costs, which has a dramatic impact on his product and the profit made on his product. So it's a really uncertain situation because he's no idea what's going to happen in the next couple of months. He's no idea what's going to happen after that. But he knows that there is potential real damage to the profitability of his business and actually potentially threatening the survival of his business. And there's many around him. There's many board advisors. There's many non-execs that are telling him that he needs to pass that cost on immediately to his customer. And the question is, does he pass that cost on immediately to his customer in the top line that he charges and then threaten potentially the customer base, potentially have the situation where the customer decides that isn't fair or appropriate, or they're not going to tolerate that cost and cease doing business with this company. So it's a really, really challenging time. And so through the coaching process and exploring this person's mind and their thinking, we were able to help this person get to what was for them the certain decision. And what I noticed going on in the mind of the client is they knew really what they needed to do. And actually they want to hold. They don't want to pass on cost right now. And the decision that the person made was, let's hold for 2 or 3 months. Let's see how the whole situation plays out. Let's not do anything rash. So that's their decision. That was a certain decision that they decided they wanted to make, which they knew before they had come to meet me. But what happens is, often in the mind you have clarity, you know really deep down what your gut says you should do, but thought gets in the way. And thought gets in the way, and I go round and I go round and round and I go, yes, but what if this and what if that, and what are they going to think, and what it's going to mean to my job, or what, and so on and so on and so on. And we somehow get caught in a thought jungle, and the thought jungle complicates and confuses and messes up and avoids me seeing clearly what actually deep down I know I need to do. And the journey we're inviting you to go on is to look for the clarity, look for what the gut says, not what the noise in the head is doing and how it's clouding over. And what we're doing here is actually we're distinguishing a difference in thought that you're having. So psychologists say we're actually having 60,000 thoughts every day. So thousands and thousands of thoughts occurring, moment by moment by moment they're occurring. And we're suggesting to you that there's a difference in the quality of those thoughts. Some call some of the thoughts personal thinking. So personal thinking is thinking that is really personal to you. It's personal to you that you can get wrapped up in. It can be judgmental, it can be noisy, it can be the worrying thoughts, it can be the fearful thoughts, it can be the criticizing thoughts, it can be the questioning thoughts, and so on and so on. And we often look at personal thinking like it's the soap opera that gets created in your head. Yeah, but what if this happens, or what if that happens? Oh my goodness, yeah, but what's going to happen here or there, and so on and so on. It's noisy. It creates the noise in the head. And then there's more impersonal thinking. You might have heard us already talk about flow state. In flow state, things occur naturally. When we're in flow, we're in this natural rhythm, and flow occurs naturally, and thought occurs more naturally, and thought occurs more obviously when we're in this state.
And there's a really useful way that we can discern the times when we're in our personal thinking versus impersonal thinking, when we're caught up or when it's free-flowing. And you may have heard us talk about this in some of our other podcast episodes. We've talked about our feelings as a barometer to where the kind of level of thinking that we're having and whether we can really buy into it and trust it or not. And I would invite our listeners to play with this and tune into this and perhaps have an awareness of this within themselves. When you're feeling quite heavy and caught up within yourself, and this is sort of a sentient feeling in the body, that knot in the tummy, when there's just that heavier feeling to it. What's the thinking that's going along with that? Is it clear thinking? Is it light? Probably not. Versus the times where you're perhaps making a decision about something or you have some thinking come through and there's that real sense of clarity and obviousness. The sentient feeling in the body around that tends to be much lighter.
So what we're saying is really strong feeling, strong emotion is suggesting to you that you might be caught up in personal thinking. And when caught up in personal thinking, you may not get to the clarity that will give you the certain decision that you're looking for. At this point, I might want to just talk to you about the snow globe. You may be familiar with a snow globe, and the snow globe is one of those things you can buy it's got all the snow in it. You shake it. I can think of the Christmas scene, and there's the Father Christmas on his reindeer, and I shake it, and I see this wonderful snow running around. And if I leave the snow globe for a while, eventually the snow settles, and I see Father Christmas clearly with his reindeer. And the mind is a bit like that. The mind is sometimes like we're revved up and we've shaken the snow globe, and the snow is like the thoughts, the zillions of thoughts that are running around the mind. And as they're running around the mind, we feel strong emotion. And actually, what we're suggesting to you is that it's not really a great point often to seek clarity and seek certain decisions. So let the snow settle, go for a run, have some time out, let your weekend pass, and notice how the mind settles. And when the mind settles, you have access to more clarity, more certainty.
And I think the key thing to point out there, Martin, also is that, like the snow globe, there's nothing that we actually need to do in order to settle our minds. It will happen naturally.
The other key thing to add here is that sometimes we don't have the answer when we want it. With certain decisions, we might have to make a decision on the spot. We might need to decide right now, and if we need to decide right now, then fair enough, that's what we need to do. But there are some really big decisions that we can make over a period of time. Personally, it might be moving a house, for example. Big decision, you don't need to decide today. You're letting it evolve over time, and there may be some decisions in your business life that are like that, where you could make it over the next 2 or 3 months. And sometimes we don't have the answer right now. The wisdom doesn't come through, and we don't have the clarity that says what we want to do. And what we tend to do is wrestle with that and struggle and try and work it out. And somehow there's this strange way that the mind works, that the more we struggle with it, the more frustrating it can become. And what we experience is that the clarity can come at some point over these next 2-3 months. So sometimes we don't need to struggle and sort it out right now. We can wait for the clarity. We might even be out running tomorrow morning. We might be in the shower in a week's time. But there's something about how clarity pops in at certain points when it's required. If that makes sense to you, then we need to struggle less hard and accept and know that when we need it, the clarity is going to show up.
And of course, there will be times where, as you said, Martin, we will need to make a decision about something there and then. So if we've discerned that this is a decision that we need to make right now, then almost the slight paradox in what we're suggesting is that, again, the intelligence of the mind, of the system, will have the best thinking that we can have in that moment to make the decision that we need to. So we're not suggesting as a prescription that people should wait for 2 or 3 months or a week. That if there is a situation where you have to make a decision right here, right now, the intelligence of the system will give you the best thinking that you've got to do that.
And I appreciate for some of you listening, this approach that we're taking in this conversation may sound a little bit fluffy, a bit ethereal. And some of you listening will have a real strong intellect and a strong left brain approach to making decisions. And of course, the left-hand side of the brain, which is known to be the more logical, rational part of the brain, plays its role, has a critical role to play in making your decisions. But of course, actually, in really complex decisions, they're not all logical and rational. There's a huge felt sense, and this is the bit that we're pointing to, more of a right brain conversation, really, to help you tune into the sense around decisions that comes from a knowing that isn't the left brain working it out. So if I'm to summarize a lot of what we've said in this podcast, I'd just like to remind you that there is no such thing as certainty. There's no such thing as a right decision. So the mind and you can let go and not feel a need to be in control. We're suggesting to you there's a really important place for the left brain to play a role in collecting data and being analytical in decision making. But there's some incredible power in the mind that is also works in addition to that.
And so we'd just like to invite you to notice, when it really looks like there's a right or wrong decision to you, or where there's that sense of urgency to make a decision and to know the answer. That might just be your signpost to just take your foot off the accelerator and allow that deeper intelligence of the mind to give you clarity and insight. And then also for you to reflect on, well, where are you creating narratives that you have to have a certain decision or you need to know the outcome now? Where is that flex, and is it something that you can have some time to look at?
To find out more about our work with individuals, teams and organisations, please visit www.thepragmagroup.com. Or if you'd like to connect, email us at info@thepragmagroup.com.